Would you like to introduce Miss Dr. Berry?
So I'll keep it short and then I'll have Dr. Berry introduce himself because he got a lot on his resume. So I take honor to introduce Dr. Berry. I look up to him. He was one of my mentors in college. I look up to him as an uncle. I'm really glad that you came, Dr. Berry, especially now that I'm a teacher. I was first year student, now I'm a teacher. And you're the one who helped me become who I am today. So thank you.
And she is dynamic. We are so honored to have her on our team. So thank you for inspiring her, because that's going to live for a long time.
So, this is awesome. I was so excited to even be invited, and like it's one of those things. I've been in education long enough now to have students who have students, right? And so, and when I was in my role in Mankato, Jocelyn and Miss Thompson is one of the students that it's a reciprocal thing. Like the inspiration is not just one-sided. And that's part of what I want to actually talk to you about tonight in terms of the whole idea of unity and the idea of coming together. It's always a circle, right? It's not a linear thing necessarily. And in fact, because it's Black History Month, I'm going to tie it into the concepts and people of African diaspora understand in terms of what Robert Fair Thompson calls the flash of the spirit, which is our past, our present, and our future is all kind of nonlinear, and we touch points in which we they call it remember, and then we can use that information at any given time. So Ms. Thompson was coming through Mankato, I was remembering like my inspirations as an educator and who was inspiring, and it was Black women. it was my all Black female science department, even though I'm not in sciences, but they inspired me to pursue my own passion and really propelled me to become a teacher. And so one of the things that I wanted to share just right away was, so Jocelyn, you asked me about teaching or talking about this concept of unity and in the context of who's in this group as well, so this is in parent involvement. And I think of it like this: the word unity is inside of another word too. It can be, and that is community. If you think about those, those two words, to commune, and then to be unified in your commune. I mean, that word community is indicative of this concept of coming together in ways that supersedes the kind of walls and artificial, sometimes constructive barriers we put around it. So for parents particularly, this idea about, you're charging your children or you're charging teachers with raising your kids in certain ways in terms of their education and teaching them and nurturing them. And at the same time, our responsibility is not disconnected from one another. So what I think about is this: Nelson Mandela had a profound quote that I like to use. He said, "The greatest revelation of a society's soul is the way in which it treats its children." So when he's talking about that, he's not talking about the way that teachers treat, the way that he's saying a society like this is a community endeavor to raise our kids, especially when you think about race and you think about Black, brown, and indigenous kids. You think about and then how even white kids that have to be raised in a society where they don't even get to learn about themselves other than through the prism of what we call, the Imperial Project. And now what I'm going to do is break this down. So what I mean by that is what Black folk have always understood is that our entire way of life going forward is in community. It's in being together. It's in the collective sense. And even to the point where other folk who don't necessarily have to identify as being Black can benefit from what that collective culture has given. Let me give you one example. I'm glad you did that game, Jocelyn, with you asked the question about the first African-American Congress, right? Hiram. So that brother, what's interesting is that it was black men, and because we know they didn't let women, so we're going to make sure we acknowledge that, right? It was black men in terms of who in that 15th Amendment, who they ratified in terms of giving the vote to black folk was black men. So we understand that part of it. They let women out, which is unfortunate, right? But black men at that time, what did they do? They said, not only do we need public education, but we need it for everybody. That's a collective sense. Black people are responsible for us having public education in this country. And even education, the way that we do it in all of its forms, was centered around this idea of everyone who's a citizen of the United States and not, right, should have, if you're here, you are entitled to a free education that will help you to fulfill whatever your dreams are. And so I think that that's important to understand, that that's a part of our, community. And then with that, for me, in the word unity also is this idea of love. And I know that can be sometimes a flowery thing for some folk. However, what I think about it as is in connectivity to and adjacent to justice and education. It's a love project. In other words, we can't do what Nelson Mandela is suggesting in terms of like revealing what we believe about children if we don't love, right? So in other words, what we see, what we have seen far too often is the lack of that nourishment for our children through the policies and through the ways in which, they're dismantled in our society and in education of all of its forms, not just in the school settings, but more broadly. And so what he's talking about actually ties to this love project, and that we need to consider what that means individually and then collectively. Collectively, it means to me that it's what Cornel West said. Dr. Cornel West said so love is justice. Justice rather is what love looks like in public. So if love is justice, and justice is what love looks like in public, then our public education and or our education systems of all kinds, whether it's public, private, charter, is reminiscent of how much we're willing to love. And so I'm thinking about how to frame this in a way that allows us, especially you on this call, to understand how important that is and not to take it for granted. Not to take what you will say to a kid, your own kids or anybody else's kid, how you show up for each other and for each other's children is really, really important. What you present is important. How you come together and the front that you put, not necessarily the facade. I'm talking about the front in terms of your actual commitment to being human, right? In this. To be real with our kids, to be honest with them, to be loving, to challenge them in ways that helps them to grow. I think about those things because it's in those moments that we can do some things that break through the barriers that exist for our kids and for each other. We can do some things that we come together in ways to dismantle a system that is not designed, particularly for Black and brown kids, to succeed, because we're willing to love enough. See, to me, I'd be remiss not to talk about the context that we are in. I mean, we just came through not only a year of all the disparity that we see with COVID and the George Floyd and all of these different episodes that reinforce what this nation has stood for ultimately in terms of those who are in power. And so what I'm saying is, but Black folk particularly have loved enough to keep going, right? To keep breaking through. I'm reminded of Miss Ella Baker, who said, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking. I'm gonna keep on marching down the freedom lane. Like she and others, we're willing to love enough to say, I'm not going to let this stop us. And so I think about our kids, I think about our unity, I think about how we come together in ways that we lead with love. And then I think about it like this. It's a somatic experience. What I mean by that is I think of unity, I think of the pathways that we use this concept to come together around an agenda. And it sounds like, you all have been doing that with your plan. I mean, I heard Dr. Russell talk about, the plan that you're working on, even with COVID. There's a plan that you have to kind of look at, and it may have to be adjusted in real time. And so I think about how we do this, even in hard times, with joy. To me, those things are like inextricably connected. For instance, so for me, because I'm a big believer in the somatic, sort of holistic framework. When I mean somatic, I mean body. Like how we navigate this world is literally a nervous system issue in many ways. Like it's holistic, like how we interact with the traumas that we experience, whether it be COVID or the George Floyd or systemic racism and so forth. It really impacts our central nervous system. And so part of how we actually excise that is to do what, again, some of the ancestors have taught us by remembering that it was a somatic exercise for them to say, you know what, I might be working in this field, but I'm going to sing a song called I'm going to lay down my burdens down by the riverside, right? Or I'm going to sing a joyous song or ring shout, even though, I'm walking around this field without no shoes on. I'm going to sing, I got shoes, you got shoes, all God's children got shoes, because they had a joy that was met the challenge of their pain and of their trauma. When you're talking about unity and we talk about coming together, it's understanding that our unity has to match and meet any of our challenges that tries to disunify us. Because there are forces that try to disunify us. And so, absolutely, I'm seeing the chat, how the blues were formed, right? So the disunifying attempts that have been made in the structural sense have always been met by people who are willing to come together with joy and love to meet whatever that challenge is. And so our education system is notwithstanding is a part of that tradition. I think about brothers like, Carter G. I mean, we can't have Black History Month, without, referencing the person who's responsible for giving us this month, Carter G. Woodson. And he wrote this book, The Miseducation of the Negro, right? Which he challenged people to understand this concept of what was happening in a way that allowed us to come together and tell the truth, right? To be honest about what we're up against, both in interracial conversation and an intraracial conversation. So Black folks have had some conversations with each other, and Black folks have had some conversations with white folks and Native folks and Asian folks. And so what Carter G did in those days was to challenge us, to challenge us to a more honest depiction of what it is that this month, that we now have should be about in terms of its entirety all year long. And I think about the joy in which, one has to be able to approach that, to do that. I think about how, and again, Dr. Russell knows this because we've done some things with music, and I know he, so music and arts in terms of unity, those are the sort of the building blocks. Those are the glue. Those are the mechanisms for fellowship, and along with obviously food, right? Come on now, y'all know, you know about that too. But the idea though is those things allow us to bring people together across different other kinds of boundaries, because there's something universal in a song that appeals to people. And there's something universal in having people come together and reflect and and engage with one another around that. And so we saw examples of that in this past year around how music and the arts helped to heal, helped to bring people together, helped to bring communities together in ways that even some have never done before. And so, so I think about this concept of unity. It boils down in terms of its essence to understand it, especially in a school setting, in the context of what it means to educate in the collective sense. There's two principles that I rely on in my work. And by the way, so some of y'all know already, but so I'm an interim dean of the School of Urban Education at Metropolitan State University. And I've been in higher ed, for the past 8 years as a faculty member and now as an administrator. But I was in K-12 for 20 years as a music teacher. And I know from my experience, K all the way through higher ed, is that the one thing that I have learned about this is that we cannot do right by our children in an isolated fashion. So that's what I'm saying about unity. Cannot do, like parents, absolutely, you're essential. You're essential to the relationship and to the ecosystem of how kids are educated. Educators who are on here, you're essential to the ecosystem of working with parents and administrators. Administrators, you're essential to the vision and the work that's necessary to provide the resources and to nurture from a capacity standpoint everybody within any institutional or educational institution. And so unity to me is epitomized when we understand that. So the other principle then I rely on is this idea around sort of the Africanist, it's a South African concept again, but it is permeated even in the United States through African American traditions, and that is this philosophy that some scholars say best education is when you sit in a circle around a tree and you reason together. Like that understanding about community, because that means anybody can be a part of that. Anybody from the community can come in with wisdom and knowledge about things that might contribute to the community. And what does the tree represent? The roots, the fruit, the leaves, nature, right? All of the interdisciplinary subjects, if you will, that are necessary for to educate someone's mind. And so I think about those principles are very important when you're talking about building community and epitomizing community and sustaining community, because trees are sustained. I mean, you think about the metaphor, I mean, the sort of a analysis of that, right? It is very sustaining. It has the ability to withstand time, and you plant, and then you grow new seedlings, right? Right? There's this ability to replant from one tree, right? You can plant a whole forest. And I think about our babies, and I think about it like this. We need this in the United States almost more than anything because of the barriers that have existed and still exist to this day. And being that y'all are in, this is an urban context, right? And I think about what it means to use the sort of inspirations that helps us to unify around a common vision and a direction. And so I'll end with this. One of the ways that I think about that is the literacy that is necessary for us to stay unified. So what does it take? This is a question which might be reflective or reflection, is what does it take for us to be unified in terms of a grounding principle? And one of the principles that I hold dear to my heart actually gleaned from, again, using music and poetry as an example, from it's a poem that has actually been elevated to a certain extent in song by artists and musicians, but it's a poem by Tupac Shakur. And so he kind of conceptualizes it as the rose that grew from the concrete. And he says, did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong. It learned to walk without having feet. Funny, it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else even cared. So this is why it's necessary to be unified, because we know that our children are growing up in an environment in some ways, not in always, but in some ways, that is not designed for them to flourish, especially in the settings, which is why I know a little bit about your mission. I mean, I think that that's one of the reasons your particular driven mission is to make sure that these kids have a chance. And so this concept for me means that we have to be unified around this principle. This is how I would say it. We should celebrate the roses. We should celebrate, because there's some roses growing and they're defying nature. However, we should also question and love the roses enough to bust up the rest of the concrete so that they can all flourish. That should be a unifying sort of a principle for people who are coming together, and that's educators, that's parents, that's boards, that's when you have committees. those are the kind of visions and missions that coalesce around doing what needs to be done to educate our kids. And finally, educate comes from the Latin word educare, which basically means to lead out of ignorance, right? To lead from something, to lead from adolescence. I mean, all of these things can basically coalesce around that definition. And to do that, it does take a combination of all of these things in community. So I'll stop there. I mean, I because I'm a preacher's kid. I can start going on, and but I think about that, and I'm also, though I like to be dialogical when I do speak, speaking things, because I like hearing from people to see what resonates too, in certain ways. And I don't know if we have time for all of that, but I would love to see, and hear, what your thoughts and questions might be around this concept. But I love people. I'm so happy to be here. I love y'all, even though I'm just meeting some of y'all, because I don't have no problem saying it, because I think in the human condition, we need to lead with that, right? And so my presupposition is love. I don't care if I'm just meeting you, if I've been knowing you, like my presupposition is love. And so this is a love project. And so I'm happy to be here. And I just hope that anything I've said might spark something, and we can feel free to reflect and ask questions and comment.